Welcome to the Power Brain, Power Life interview series. I started this because there are a lot of misconceptions around the brain that I certainly have learned in the last couple of years. The first one is that the brain stops growing at 25, that it's locked at 25, completely untrue. We only use 10% of our brains, completely untrue. The new things that we've learned, though, are incredible. The brains are the most complex tool in the known universe. It's constantly changing and learning and adapting throughout our life. And there's so much more that we still don't understand. So how can we leverage that to make our lives better? I certainly know that just my kind of nerdy obsession with brain science and neuroscience has improved my life 1,000%. I am thrilled and honored to have our guest today. Dr. Nikolaos Dimitriadis has been applying neuroscience in business and education for over 15 years. He's an award-winning communications professional educator and consultant. He's the author of the books Neuroscience for Leaders, a brain adaptive leadership approach, now in its second edition, which is the edition where I stumbled on he and his writing partner's work. He joins us from Belgrade, Serbia. Nikos, welcome to the interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in. I will say I'm going to start out actually with the caveat that you have at the beginning of your book. The definition of leaders can be very broad. We can be talking about leaders in the community, public service, sports. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be kind of in a traditional corporate environment, just because that's the environment that I'm used to. But keep in mind, dear viewer, as you're watching this, that it's a very broad interpretation. So I'll start actually where you start in the book, Nikos. What makes a great leader?
This is a fantastic question, and I'm sure there are many ideas out there, and countless books and papers and LinkedIn posts and speeches and seminars trying to capture this, I think, essential question. There are many ways, as you said, that we can approach the topic. I very much like the one from evolutionary psychology and, of course, evolutionary leadership that we touch in the book as well, which is essentially about movement and coordination. So a leader is a person that helps a group coordinate its behavior towards a specific direction. And of course, evolutionary, this comes from real world problems. You know, when we were living in caves or in savannas, we needed to decide, are we going to leave this place, move to another one, migrate, or we have this tribe that is maybe bothering us. Are we going to attack them, or are we going to stay and defend? So all these are actually issues of tuning the group behavior towards a common goal. Now, this common goal, and we say coordination because it was a really territorial, geographical, spatial a problem. We had to go literally from one place to another. We had to go together as a team in order to succeed. Of course, now it's not only an issue of territorial movement. It can be other types of. It can be a business move. It can be a community move, as you said. Okay, it can be an educational move. But the common theme in all this is coordinating activity in a group towards a common goal. The person that motivates and coordinates this activity, if you want, provides the true north for the others to move, can be called a leader.
When you explain it like that, it sounds so simple. And I think we all know it is not that simple. So really the book tries to encapsulate what you call the BAL method or the BAL approach. And just my dime store neuroscientist description, you've got 3 columns: thinking, emotions, and brain automations, and then relations kind of as the line that kind of connects to all of that. Kind of dig into that a little bit to give those a little more detail and context.
So what we tried to do together with my co-author, Professor Psychogios, is to try to summarize the current understanding, the neuroscience lenses by which we can see leadership, as I explained it before, and try to offer to people a comprehensive model so they can both understand this neuroscientific view of leadership, but also to provide practical tips so they can apply it in their personal and professional lives. And what we came up with after many years of both studying it and doing neuro tests with people around the world and doing academic research, we came up with this model that helped, first of all, us trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, and of course, to articulate it to other people so it can be useful to them. And what we came up with is a combination of some already existing ideas and something new. And the already existing ideas was this categorization of brain activities, brain function, if you want, into these three classical groups. So there's a cognitive group of functionalities that the brain has, the analytics, the crunching of data. Logic is in there as well. And then there is another one which has to do with emotions, with what we call motivation, and of course with feelings, the everyday experience of feelings that we have. Let's call this affective part. And then there is, of course, as we said, brain automation, there is a behavioral part, a part that includes the things that we usually do every day. Sometimes is habits, sometimes are hardwired reactions to issues. So there is a real world consequence of whatever is happening in our brain. And this in psychology, it used to be called the think, feel, do model, these three elements. But what we realized more and more studying neuroscience from these various perspectives is that, and being big fans of social brain theory, is that relations is actually what makes us human. One of the modern explanations of consciousness, which of course consciousness is this very difficult theme, difficult topic, but one of the modern theories, and one that I follow as well, concerning why do we have consciousness and why do we have the other also aspects of our brain, is because of social cohesion and social action. So this relational parameter that you mentioned, we actually envisioned it as one that cuts the other three. So you have your thinking part, you have your feeling part, and you have your behavioral part, and the relational is influencing all three. So instead of being a fourth pillar, we have it as a horizontal to influence all three. And the feedback that we get globally from the book, I mean, being now in the second edition, as well from our clients, coaching, consulting clients, it has been very positive. The book is already translated in Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Vietnamese, a few other languages. So we're very grateful of how people accepted this model globally.
I appreciate that explanation, and even lowbrows like me can understand that. One of the things that really jumped out in the book that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on is what you call corporate bias. So this is, and again, this is my interpretation of it. You have these institutions. It could be governmental, it could be corporate institutions that have lived longer than us. They were born, 100 years ago, and they'll be alive 100 years from now. And in that, there is some institutional fabric that everyone deals with on a daily basis. So one of the things that you highlight in the book is how do you combat that corporate bias? Because if you've been in one of these institutions for long enough, your brain just believes this is the way it is. This is how we act. This is how we make decisions. Walk us through some of the steps to really kind of break through that fog for a little more realism.
Okay, first of all, fantastic question. And I have to introduce one term here, which is homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is a term that comes from biology, and it describes the condition of a system that the system is considered as in normal state. For example, our bodies, they biologically operate in an optimum way when we have a very specific body temperature, right? I mean, wherever you go in the world, the human animal, the human species, have a specific body temperature. It's between 36 and 37 degrees. And when you have hypothermia, you know, you go below that, or when you have fever, which is above that, the system is out of balance, out of normality, and all these processes start in order to bring it back to normal. The same with you know, this pH of 5.5. It's also, you know, it goes to acidity or becomes alkaline. So the same ideas about physical systems are now introduced, both about how the brain operates, but also how groups of people operate. And it is a star neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. You know, we are all looking up to Antonio Damasio and all his contribution. In his latest book, The Strange Shape of Things, he actually describes the homeostasis of whole organizations, I mean, groups of people, organizations, and even societies. So if you take the idea of homeostasis, like what is my normal way of being, and if I'm kicked away from this, I have this automatic reaction to come back, to protect it, to become again normal. The same happens in organizations, and you mentioned in this sociological process of institutionalization, that there is a proper way of doing this here, where the system has found to stay into equilibrium after a long time. It learned to be normal in this specific state of affairs. And this is the homeostasis of an institution. And it's very important to understand what is the homeostasis of our institution, what is the body temperature or the pH level of us, and they are very different between institutions. And also we need to understand what is the knee-jerk reaction of the institution when, because of some, you know, condition, it's pushed away from the homeostasis, and you can learn a lot of this reaction of the organization. You know, sometimes it's hostile, is fast, is decisive, or other institutions can be slow, can be more open, can be more patient to see how things operate. So you learn a lot from organizations and their homeostasis when you see the homeostasis actually, you know, pushed out of its baseline. Okay, so in order to deal with this kind of homeostatic states that we recognize are not actually optimal, they are probably the relic of the past. Okay, and we need actually to create a new normal level. This is called, by the way, allostasis. Allo in Greek is another. So we have to, from homeostasis, the same stasis, the same state, to move to another state. How do we bridge this gap? How we go from a state of affairs that we recognize that is actually harming the organization to one that it is much better and maybe more adaptive to the challenges that we face today? There are two things, Matthew, and again, it comes from biology as a science. In order for a biological system to change, even chemistry, from a chemical system to change, for example, from one which is a non-living being to become to life to be created, you will see that chemists talk about two things. The one is a catalyst. So you introduce an outside element, which by itself, it doesn't change, but it creates chemical reactions which change the thing. Or you change the outside conditions in so dramatic way that the inside organism also has to adapt to the external conditions. And I think that both ideas have merit. It's not by accident that many organizations, in their effort to change things, they create new positions and they bring new people from the outside in. This is the catalyst, situation. On the other hand, you might want to place your team in specific environments, sometimes even learning environments, so the team can you know, sense what is happening in the outside world and incorporate. You know, many companies take a group of leaders and they send them to, you know, other industries or to other countries to sense what is happening there, and this change of the external conditions to be internalized. And I think both of these ways have merit and should be tried. Now, concerning the model we have in the book, of course, we recommend that every leader should have always these 4 elements in their mind, and in their heart, of course. It's what people know, what people feel, what people are used to do, and how people relate with each other. And these are actually the levers we have to move in order to create change.
That is fantastic. And one of the translations I hear a lot, either when you're within an institution or you're hiring someone in, they talk a lot about culture, company culture. And there's the phrase that's gotten hot over the last couple of years, company culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it really is because of these decades, maybe even century-long sensibilities that people have. And it can work positive or negative. My understanding is it can work to the negative. If you look at Wells Fargo and that culture of fraud, of actually ripping off your customers and still being able to have a good night's sleep that night. But it can work for the positive in institutions like, I'm not endorsing anything, but the United Nations, been around for decades and decades and decades, has certainly driven a lot of positive things in the world. Another thing that you talk about in the book, that if there was one part that I wouldn't have known how to articulate, but it spoke to my heart because this is almost perfectly encapsulates my leadership style. You have adapt, bet, grow. Adapt, bet, grow. And what's so interesting in that is the adaption is figuring out the landscape, seeing where the moving pieces and parts are. Make your bets, and that's the big one, because taking risk is very subjective. Someone's huge risk is another person's just means of doing business. And then grow, learning those feedback loops. Dig into that a little bit further, because I absolutely love it. If I could apply it to everything in my life, I would.
So I would like to focus a little bit on the betting part, because I think it's something that I can personally relate a lot in my life with, because the things that we write in the book, they're not just theoretical or academic ideas. These are things that come from real life, either our personal life or through the research that we have done, or through the research of other people, and of course through our consulting and business career. And we really, when we started writing this book, the first edition a few years back, we said we're not going to write something that we cannot stand by. We cannot really, first of all, us believe in it, because we have seen it working and right. So we were very careful in choosing ideas. And this betting idea, it was something that resonated so amazingly with me when I saw the name and the description. Then I looked back in my life and I realized that many of the things that I'm proud of, or I've been very thankful that I experienced in my life, came with this kind of mindset, because actually you described the mindset. And this mindset says, life is extremely complex and dynamic, right? We live in a completely different environment than our parents and, of course, our grandparents, where stability was the name of the game. Even when there was change, there was one change at the time that had very specific and rigid impact, and then again we were entering a very rather stable long period. Now,
absolutely,
where the change is coming from, and what type of change it will be, technological, will it be political? You don't know. So it happens all the time. I realized that it makes sense from a strategy point of view, when you have to take decisions in your life, sometimes smaller decisions, sometimes bigger decisions, is instead of going and saying, in a very closed and rigid way, this is the best, and I completely put everything behind it, to be a little bit more open-minded and more playful and more curious around these issues. Okay, and try maybe to invest your time, your energy, your relationships in few different directions at the same time, and then see which of these directions will actually flourish. And then you go to this and you nurture this, because this has proven by reality, not because of your intentions or because of your beliefs, but reality itself has voted, has chosen this path. And again, through this path, you create like a branch. It opens some more possibilities where you explore. And then from there is another tree created, and it opens up like that. And I see that, maybe it's the classical Bayesian statistical way of thinking that, by the way, most of neuroscientists now, and myself, I support the Bayesian view of the brain, that the brain actually predicts the future by creating these various possibility scenarios for the future.
Wow.
Yes, this is actually one of the hottest theories now in neuroscience. So the brain creates this predictive outcomes, many predictive outcomes, possible outcomes for many different things that you do in life, because you don't do one thing in life. Every day we do hundreds of things. And through this Bayesian, let's say, selection or prediction of outcomes, you start with some probabilities, credences as they call it. You have an initial position that maybe this is more possible than this, but as you go along, this is also what the brain does, collects real-time feedback of what is happening in order to change as we go the possibilities between, or the credences of the probability of each one outcome, and then see which one is the most probable and choose that. So it actually fits. Yes, it actually fits of how the brain works and what we recommend in the book as a strategy in life, because it's also this interesting model between foxes and hedgehogs, right? I mean, maybe we have it even in the book. It's from the Science of Prediction, that I think it was Tetlock, the guy that came up with the idea. By studying how people predict the future. He gave a lot of questionnaires to various professionals, and he said, please predict 10 years from now. And also he gave them some personality questionnaires. And what he found out is that there was a difference, small but indeed there, between people's ability to project and predict the future. And the best ones were the ones that were actually using this kind of small bets, open-ended, different probabilistic model, rather than the ones that said, this will happen, I know it, I'm an expert, and which he called hedgehogs. While the foxes were a little bit more open, they were starting from empirical data and then formulating the ideas, etc., etc. So there is a lot of evidence from different sources coming and validating this small bets theory or approach in life.
I came into our Zoom meeting just wanting to talk and get your thoughts, and now I feel like I've got homework. I am absolutely going to do a bunch of research on Bayesian predictions. That's
fantastic, actually.
That's really, really cool. So just a couple more questions. I
Sure.
want to be very sensitive with your time. I'm sure you're a very busy man. So one is just kind of I guess one question is looking back and one question is looking forward. As you look back, and this is really a question around corporate culture, when you look back on that kind of traditional organizational man, company man, 1950s era, gray suits, history in company culture, setting aside the misogyny, racial inequalities, but when you and I don't mean to downplay those, but when you look at that model, somehow that worked. Like, we look back on it now and it looks ridiculous. A bunch of white men, just cutting deals in smoke-filled rooms, maybe having a few too many martinis at lunch and sleeping it off in the office. So given that it looks ridiculous now, why did it work? That's a big question for me.
Maybe first of all, there were not many alternatives around based on the, at that time, social and power structure that these institutions were born into, because unfortunately, I don't see humanity always choosing something that maybe was theoretically or intellectually correct, but what is actually even possible based on how a whole system is organized at a specific moment. And systems need time to develop. And I think that what we discussed before about catalysts and as well as changing overall conditions, all these are precious on a system to change. Now, why did it work back then? You know, I usually start from a question in some of my seminars, and I ask people, if we were back in the 50s, let's say, okay, and I asked you in 10 years, so we're 1950s now, try to predict 1960s, and I asked you which company, for example, automotive company would be number one. We are in 50s and we predict the 60s.
Yep.
Or would be number one, we are in the 50s and we try to predict in the 60s which one is the, would be the top photography company. No, if you said Ford, GM, or if you said Kodak, you would actually, and you bet on it, you actually put your money in the prediction, you would probably make money. Your prediction would have a very big probability credence to be correct, because the system, the global system that you would operating in was rather settled. The entropy was lower. Let's call it like this, again from physics. Okay, the entropy was lower. Now today, the entropy is much higher. So I ask the same audiences. Okay, so if you had to give me all your money and invest it now, in which one would be the number one social medium in 10 years from now? I think the most popular in the world is Facebook, right? I mean, this has still the number one, the most popular number of users. So if we were to, how many would you invest in that? And nobody says I would invest, because 10 years is now. And then I ask them, what about in 5 years? Yes, what about in 5 years? Would you bet all your money that in 5 years Facebook will be number one? Again, nobody's investing, And then say, what about 3 years? And then you start seeing some hands. And then what about 2 years? And then you start seeing more hands. And this shows how this time frame and this entropy of the system has changed. And of course, there has been a lot of discussion and analysis how this entropy increased. The globalization, of course, the fall of the Soviet Union in the end of the 80s, beginning of 90s. Technology is a big part of it. All this also promoted ideas that needed to be promoted, as you said, very important ideas in society. And we are now in a level where entropy is very high. And I think this is why science, and especially neuroscience leadership-based models, are so important, because the challenges and the environment where a leader had to operate in the 50s and the 60s is completely different than the challenges and the dilemmas to be taken today. So we cannot be using old models. We have to create new models.
Well, it's so interesting, because it's just like how our brains are wired. Everything's constantly changing. Everything's constantly adapting. And that's where we go to the adapt, bet, and grow.
Exactly.
Okay, final question. You've got 2 editions out of this book. I'm sure that with all of your day-to-day just seeped in this subject, what's next? And let's talk about it, not what's next broadly from neuroscience, but really from that leadership perspective. What's next? What are the things that leaders need to be listening for to continue their journey of effectiveness?
I think what I'm going to say is something very known to your listeners, and but it's confirmed day in, day out, is the people centricity. That leadership, as we started, this is how we started. Leadership is about navigating a group of people in a territory and creating this group cohesion and common effort towards one goal. So there is no leader without followers. That's very simple. So it has to be. It's by definition people-centric. But I think that something that we tried, at least in the book, to argue, and maybe in the 3rd edition we'll do it even more, is that there is no one type of leader. And I think what I see lately on social media, on various seminars, webinars, writings, unfortunately we are too, we are doing groupthink, unfortunately, onto what is a leader. And we try to paint a very, again, rigid, a very specific, rigid and specific, one image of a leader. And I think that's wrong. And I will give you an example very fast. There are leaders that are needed for extreme disruption as an extreme catalyst that we were talking before, in order to change the system radically and create drastic change. But you have also,
I'll take Elon Musk maybe.
Bravo, the same, exactly. Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and then you have leaders that they run teams that work in a, they don't need their lives to change every day. And these leaders, in order to create continuity in the system, they have to be actually very different leaders. And I'm saying this because there has been allegedly some reports about both Elon Musk and Steve Jobs not being easy people to be around. They're very decisive, they're very egocentric, they're very, we would say things that all these posts on leadership lately, they would say, no, this is not a right leader, has to have full empathy, to listen, to be servant. That's all fantastic, but that's one type of leader. Different situations, different systems require, this is the adaptive part. This is what adaptation, there is not one condition by which one adaptation will be the winning one. There are many conditions, so many different types of adaptations have to be manifested in order to see actually real change and progress. So we have to be very careful when we go out and advertise the 10 characteristics of the perfect leader. To which situation?
Nikos, I cannot thank you enough for your time, for your education, and of course for your passion around the subject. I hope that everyone that's listening and viewing, I hope everyone picks up on that. I will put a link. This is going to go on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to this little book right here. So if you want to purchase it, it seriously has improved my leadership style and just my life in general. So once again, Nikos, thank you so much, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Matthew.